I have a quick question this morning before we dive into our text. I have a question. How many of you guys in here really enjoy like home renovations? Does anybody like that kind of work? You're sick, and we will pray for you at the very end. So I want to tell a quick story about a renovation that my wife and I dove into when we were young and dumb. And we had gotten married. I'm from Michigan, and in the Midwest, people tend to get married a little earlier than they do out here. So we were married at 22 and 19. And so we lived in an apartment complex for a year. But it somehow seemed that every crazy in our area lived in the same building we did, and I was ready to get out of there. I'd never lived in an apartment before. I lived in a dorm before in college, but growing up, we had a house, we had a decent, few acres or whatever, field in the back. There's more cows than there are people where I'm from, so I like space. So when I move into an apartment, I feel all scrunched up. So the first possible moment that we had to buy a house and to get out of there, we jumped at it. So we were there a year. We saved up a little bit of money, and we had some friends that were selling a house. They'd built a new home, and they were selling their old house, and they were willing to give us a great deal because it was sitting empty, and they needed it off their plate. So they cut $50,000 off what it was worth. Now, that might not sound like much here, but here would be like someone cutting off $150,000 for your house, okay? You're like, all right, cool, I can dig that. So we go to check out the house, and it's awesome. It's in an area that we love, 2.5 acres. There's a pole barn out in the front. There's a river in the backyard. I'm like, man, this is my little slice of heaven. This is awesome. This is amazing. And the house was cool. It was old, so it was full of character. Now, you use that word character when there's a lot of problems and you don't know what else to call it. You call it character, okay? So to give you an idea what this house was like, it was built in 1869, very old house. It didn't have poured walls for the basement. It had stones that they mortared like around them, and most of them stayed where they should. So with a house that old comes a lot of problems. Anybody that's ever worked on an old house, you know what I'm talking about. We never used words like square, plumb, level. That just didn't happen unless it was not or didn't, in front of it. So lots of issues with this house. But we're like, you know what? We watched TLC for 3 days. We're experts. And we know that what you want to do is you want to buy the junkiest house on the street and make it nice and then, make a lot of money, right? That's the plan. So that's what we did. A lot of beautiful homes in this area. And so we're like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to fix it up, make it really nice. I worked construction with my dad for about 4 years. And so that made me, once again, an expert. I knew exactly what I was doing. And partner that with I'm dumb enough to try anything. We're like, hey, let's do it. So we dove into this house. How many of you guys have seen the movie Money Pit with Tom Hanks? Yeah, that was my life. So we go and we sign papers. They give us the keys. We leave the bank. We rush right over. We open up the door, and there's water everywhere. The pipes had burst. All right, there was propane heat. Propane ran out. Pipes burst. Water everywhere. We had to replace all the flooring. We're like, oh, lovely. Well, we're still young and dumb. This is cool. No, not a problem. We'll get it all figured out. So remember I was talking about the basement. There's a bunch of rocks. So the basement, well, you see, this house sat empty for a little bit. And when you think empty, what I mean by that is no people were living there. But that doesn't mean critters didn't make their way into that house. So we had all sorts of issues with that. There was mice in the basement. There was spiders. And when I say spiders, I don't mean cute little dandy long legs. I mean spiders, okay? Now listen, one thing that you need to know about me is I have a rule. I'm generally not afraid of snakes and spiders and all that kind of stuff. My rule is if I can kill it, I'm not afraid of it, all right? There's not a lot of wisdom in that, all right? Don't write that one down. But that's my thought. If I can kill this thing, why am I afraid? Scott and Ben, I work with them, and man, a mouse runs out, and they run away like little girls. And I'm kind of like, come on, it's a mouse, whatever. So I'm not afraid of stuff like that. Spiders, all I got to do is, and that's it, all right? So I'm down in the basement trying to figure out, the heating issue or whatever. My wife comes, and she's at the top of the basement stairs. So I'm coming up the stairs, and I see this spider on one of the stairs. And she's looking at the spider. I'm looking at the spider, and I was like, I'll just kill it. I'll be the man. I raise my leg. This thing jumps at me. It jumps at me. I jump back, and I go, oh, man. This is going to be fun. My wife did not enter that basement for the 5 years that we lived in that home. She would refuse to go down there. It was no longer called the basement. It was then called the dungeon. She would not go down there for any reason. We actually got a wood stove, and we would heat our home with wood when we could. She would not fill it up. I would have to fill it up as much as I could because I knew she is not going in that basement. Not only that, but the porch over where the front door is, when we arrive, we notice there's this new little hole that wasn't there before. And we're like, that's interesting. And we hear a bunch of scratching and weird noises, and come to find out a raccoon decided to make her home in there and have, I guess it's called a litter of babies. And so now I have to rip the ceiling down to get, find a new place for this raccoon and her litter. So we had all sorts of problems. The living room, there's this weird slant. Have you ever been in a house where it's kind of like tilted, something settled funny or whatever? This house, if I were to sit down with a bowl of cereal or soup in the living room, like on a TV tray, I couldn't fill it over halfway because when I sit down, the whole thing goes like this, and it would dump on me, all right? So there's all these little issues that we're having to deal with. There was no, like, studs that ran vertically. It was slats. Everything, it was weird. It wasn't like drywall. Everything was plastered. It was a ton of work, and I have since learned to hate renovations. I don't ever want to do that again. If it's more than paint and carpet, count me out. No, thank you. This morning, I want to talk to you about a guy who took on a bigger project than what I even did, and his name is Nehemiah. So if you could turn in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 1. Nehemiah chapter 1. The title today for this message is Lessons from Nehemiah. Lessons from Nehemiah. As I was reading Nehemiah this week, different things just started to jump out at me. Things that Nehemiah took on, things that Nehemiah did that I was like, man, I want to be able to do that. I need that in my life. I love the way he did that. So we're going to go over some of those things this morning. And what I want to do is I want to kind of give you the setting of where we're jumping into our story. So earlier on, I went over, in the first service, I went through a bunch of facts and a bunch of dates, and I got a lot of blank stares. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, if that's all right. All right. If you want, I can email you my notes later, and you can fact check me if you'd like. But essentially what happens is King Nebuchadnezzar, a Babylonian king, comes in, overthrows Israel, destroys Jerusalem, and the Israelites are exiled for 70 years. And this is because of a punishment. They turn their back on God. So them being exiled was actually prophesied. So it was fulfilled. They were exiled. They had to get out of town. They had to go other places and do other things. All right, so when we read about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Ezra, all of those guys were in this time period, okay? And when we read about Nehemiah, he is actually serving a Persian king roughly about 1,000 miles from where he's from. So all of these guys are exiled. They got to get out. After the 70 years, a Persian king overthrows the Babylonians, and now the Israelites are allowed to come back, all right? But what are they coming back to? Everything has been destroyed. Everything has been destroyed. So this is kind of where our story picks up. Before we actually dive into the text, I want you to write this down. If you're taking notes this morning, which I trust that you are, write this down. If you want to see God move, you have to be willing to move. If you want to see God move, you have to be willing to move. I feel like there's a lot of times in my life where I sit back and I'm like, hey, God, can you just take care of that? I'm going to sit back over here and watch Netflix. If you could just handle that, that'd be sweet, all right? Like, take care of that for me. But what I see in this story is Nehemiah had to get up off his couch. He had to leave his comfortable little bubble, and God did some amazing things through him. So we're going to start reading in Nehemiah chapter 1. We'll start in verse 3. His brother comes to visit, all right? Nehemiah's brother comes to visit, and he shares with him some bad news. This is what he says to him. He says, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and the gates are destroyed by fire. We then read that Nehemiah weeps and mourns, and he prays, and he fasted. You see, this wall that surrounded Jerusalem is a very big deal. It is a huge deal. It wouldn't be like at your house if your fence around the house fell over. No. This would be like all your windows, all your doors are gone, and you know what? On top of that, you're missing a couple exterior walls. Anybody could come in, anybody could leave, anybody could take whatever they wanted, they could mess with whatever they wanted. This is a big problem. This is a security issue. Any good, thriving city needs that wall for protection. Now, we get to see Nehemiah's heart right away because, again, Nehemiah is about 1,000 miles away at this point. And he could have sat back and said, stinks to be them guys. I'm good. I'm comfortable. I have my job here. I'm serving the king. Everything's good. I got a nice, comfy bed. I'm good. Not my problem. But that's not what Nehemiah does. We just read he wept and he mourned and he fasted. I want to read to you verse 11. This is part of Nehemiah's prayer. He says this, O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now I was a cupbearer to the king. So Nehemiah is saying, I got to go to the king. I got to go to the king. Now I was a cupbearer. When I first read that, I think, a cupbearer, okay, so his job is, he was in charge of, proving to the king that the wine is not poison, but also he's like a wine connoisseur, so he has to, if the king's having a certain meal, this wine is good with this wine is, that's what he knows. He knows wine. But he is led to move to renovate a wall around an entire city. I think that's pretty cool. Because there's been times in my life where I sit back and I look at myself and I go, man, that's definitely a problem, but who am I? What am I going to do? But that's not Nehemiah's take. Nehemiah goes, there's a problem. I'm a cupbearer. I'm going to go to the king. Now, going to the king is a huge deal. Going to the king is a huge deal. You don't just walk into the king and say, what's up, man? Got a problem. I just want to make you aware of this. You don't send him an email like you would to a local politician letting him know the light's out near your house. No. This is a big deal. If the king doesn't want you in his presence, you're not in his presence. If he wants you in jail, you're in jail. If he wants you dead, you're dead. This is a big deal. But we read that Nehemiah bathed this in prayer. When you jump from chapter 1 to chapter 2, it's easy to think that this conversation that he has with the king happens a few days after he gets the news. It's 4 months. 4 months he was dealing with this. 4 months he was bathing this issue, this problem in prayer, asking God for his help. So the day comes. The day comes where he is going to talk to the king. He needs God's help. He needs God's help. He is willing to move, but God, you're going to have to help me with this. I want to read really quickly Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 8. It says this, And the king said to me, Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, What are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, How long will you be gone, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And the letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked for the good hand of my God was upon me. The second thing that I see here when we're going through Nehemiah is when you're willing to move, God will provide. God will provide. So the first thing we talked about is you got to be willing to move. You want to see God move in your life, you have to be willing to move. The second thing is this: when you are willing to move, God provides. So Nehemiah is already taking a risk, and he's going to talk to the king. The king sees that he's sad. He's like, "What's up, man? What's going on?" And Nehemiah begins to pour out his heart. Now, I love something that Nehemiah does here. He swings for the fences, man. He doesn't go in meekly and like, "Hey, boss, can I have Tuesday off? There's a problem over there in Jerusalem I'd like to look at." He asked for time off. We later see that he was gone 12 years. He ends up becoming governor. Now, we don't know that he asked for 12 years off necessarily, but that's what he ended up being gone an extended amount of time. He's going to rebuild a city. So he asked for a long time off. Then he says, not only that, I need letters of passage, because everybody in that area did not want to see that city rebuilt. So he says, I need letters of safe passage. Oh, yeah, and while you're at it, I would love it if you would foot the bill for the rebuilding of this city and my house. How do you feel about that? I mean, he goes for it, man. Good for him, right? And what does he say? He was granted everything he asked for because the good hand of my God was upon me. And not only was he given everything he asked for, but it says the king actually gave him army officers and cavalry. He got more than what he asked for. But man, he asked for it. He said, God, I'm gonna be willing to move, but I'm gonna need you to provide. I'm gonna need you to do what only you could do. He couldn't foot the bill to restore this city. He couldn't foot the bill to build up these walls, repair these gates, build a new home. He can't do that. But he understands this concept that his God can. That there is no bill too large for his God. So he asked for it, and he is granted. Now, I want to tell you a quick story. How many of you guys have ever been in a place where you're looking at a situation where you're like, I feel like God's calling me to do this, but I feel like there's no way that I can actually do this? Have you ever been in that spot? A few of you? A few honest people, all right? I've been there. How I got here today on Long Island was because I stood in front of a situation going, God, how? God, how? Like I said before, we're from Michigan, and my wife and I were kids pastors in a church that we grew up in. Both of our families attended. They lived 5 minutes away from us. We're in a church doing just fine. Everything is great and dandy, and I am comfortable. And then my wife comes to me and says, hey, I've been praying about something. I feel like God's moving us on. I said, what? I'm comfortable. What do you mean? Like, I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. I'm in the place I've always wanted to be in. Our families are 5 minutes away. When I mess something up on this house, my dad can come and fix it. This is great. And she said, I think God's moving us. And I said, I'm going to need some time. A year later, I finally come around. I say, I think you're right. I think God is moving us on. Well, what happened was in that time, we started the adoption process on our 2 kids. And we adopted our 2 wonderful children through foster care system. So we were dealing with the state. And we were familiar with the process because my parents have adopted 8 kids through foster care. And so when you're dealing with the state, things can move a little bit slower than what they have planned. And their goal is always to, once they start the process, to have the adoption process done within a year. The quickest that any of my siblings were adopted was 3 years. The longest was 5 years. And I'm going, we just started this process. How in the world? Like, we can't do this. We are adopting 2 children. How in the world are we going to pick up and move? Something cool really happened. God got involved. God got involved. Within 6 months from the day we started, our 2 kids were adopted. 6 months. We had person after person after person looking at our situation going, I've never seen this before. We dealt with all these people that are like, we have been doing this a long time. This does not happen. But my God stepped in. I was looking at our bank account going, how are we going to afford to move? How many of you guys have ever moved and know that there's a lot of moving expenses that take place? We weren't moving around the corner. We were moving 750 miles away. I'm looking at our bank account going, great, we live paycheck to paycheck. We can't afford this. God provided a way. He did what only He could do. We had a house in Michigan. We didn't have a house on Long Island. I don't know if you guys know this. Long Island's expensive. Very expensive. Like 3 times the cost here that it is in Michigan with what I'm used to. I don't get it. One handful of dirt from here and there. 3 times. I don't get it. But I'm looking at Long Island going, how are we going to do this? There's no way we can afford a house. I might be able to get a cardboard box from Home Depot. I mean, like, how are we going to do this? The church had purchased a parsonage. So when we move here, the house that we live in to this day, the church owns, and we are able to live here and live in a great community in East Moriches here. Every situation, every issue that I had, God says, I got this. This is not your concern. God is looking for a willing heart. You don't have to worry about the stuff. You don't have to worry about the details. You got to be willing to move. There's a verse that I've read many times in 1 Samuel 15:22. In the verse, there's a phrase, and it goes like this. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Obedience is better than sacrifice. I never got that. For a very long time, I didn't get it. And I'm going, how can obedience be better than sacrifice? God, I'm willing to give you everything that I have, anything that I own, anything that I call mine. It's yours. I'm willing to sacrifice time, energy, effort, stuff, whatever. I'm willing to sacrifice that for you. And yet I read, obedience is better than that sacrifice. One day it clicked for me. Would you like to know why obedience is better than sacrifice? Because when you obey, God has your heart. And when He has your heart, He has your stuff. When He has your heart, He has your stuff. Everything else follows when He has your heart. I could sacrifice everything that I have. I could give away everything that I own and still not give Him my heart. But when I obey Him, when I say I'm willing to move, when I say I'm willing to do what You've called me to do, here's my heart, I'm going to obey, now He truly has everything. That is why obedience is better than sacrifice. Nehemiah could have stepped back and said, all right, well, I'd be willing, but here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem. But that's not what he did. He said, God, you got my heart. You got my heart. I'm going to do whatever You've called me to do. And God provided along the way. God did what only He could do. When you are willing, God provides. Next thing I want you to write down is this. When you endure the distractions, God does the miracle. When you endure the distractions to whatever you're supposed to do, whatever God has called you to do, whatever your mission is, if you can endure the distractions, God is going to do a miracle in that situation. How many know that when God wants you to do something that Satan's not going to be happy about it? He's not. You know when Satan's happy? When you're sitting on your couch doing nothing. You know when Satan's happy? When you're in your protective little bubble, refusing to reach out. When you're refusing to go out on that limb with God, that's when you're not a threat at that point. But as soon as you get up off that thing and you say, I am going to go do what God has called me to do, that's when he starts to get nervous. That's when he starts to get nervous. And you better believe he's going to send distractions your way. He is going to send distractions your way. He is going to try to get you to stop doing what God has called you to do. I want to turn over to Nehemiah 4, verses 1 through 3. We're going to read about some guys that were some distractions, and then we're going to dive into some other things, some other distractions that Nehemiah had to deal with. Nehemiah 4, verses 1 through 3, it goes like this. Now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish, and burned ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall." The first thing that jumps out at me is these guys are starting to bring up the past. They're reminding Nehemiah that wall has already been destroyed. That city has already been destroyed. You have already fallen to the enemy. You have already fallen to the enemy. They use phrases like this: "Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and the burned ones at that?" Remember your wall, it's all burned up. It's rubbish. It's trashed. It's too late. When God wants to do something in you, Satan's going to throw your past right up in your face. And we know from reading Scripture, none of us are perfect. We've all messed up. I've messed up countless times. I've messed up the same situation countless times. I am a slow learner, and you better believe the devil's going to point that out. Hey, remember when you messed that up before? Remember when you lost your temper, you lost your cool, and you freaked out, and remember that? Remember when you mishandled that situation? Remember when you showed hate instead of love? Remember when you were judging? Remember when you did that in your past? He's going to try to deter you. He's going to try to distract you by using situations that have happened in your past. I want to say this. My youth pastor used to say, and I want to say this. Maybe this is for somebody today. He used to say this all the time. When the devil reminds you of your past, you remind him of his future. That's good. Can I get an amen on that? Amen. When he reminds you of your past, you remind him of his future. I love that. Not only that, you're going to be reminded of your weaknesses. They used phrases like feeble Jews. A fox will break down their stone wall. You're not a builder. You're a cupbearer. You're not a builder. You got weaknesses. You don't know what you're doing. You're not a public speaker. How are you going to witness to that person? You're not perfect. You're not good with words. You're going to mess that up. You've messed up things already today. So who are you to be used by God? You got weaknesses. We all got weaknesses. And what's awesome about my God is he uses us despite our weaknesses. He wants to use you despite your weaknesses. But you better believe that that's going to be thrown right in your face. There's going to be others around you that are not going to get what's going on. When God has a mission for you, when you are doing something that God has called you to do, there's going to be others around you that are not going to get it. When God does something in you and through you, don't expect other people to get it. They won't. In chapter 4, verse 10, we read about how families and friends of those working on the wall were begging them to quit. They were surrounded by enemies. Most of them probably didn't know what they were doing. And their families are going, "Stop, please stop, please stop. Just come home. Come home where you're safe, please." Others around you are not going to get it when God does something in your life. Not always. Some will. Some will. And you need to keep those good Christian friends close. But there are going to be some people in this world, when you come to know God, that are going to go, "Hey man, let's go do what we've been doing." And you're going to go, "Actually, I don't do that anymore." They're going to go, "What? What do you mean?" They're not going to get it. When you bring up things that you start doing because God enters your life, people are going to look at you sometimes like you have three heads. They're not going to understand. It might be family. It might be friends. I have family members that think I'm crazy, and I can tell they get uneasy when I walk in the room. Not because I'm going to preach at them, but because they don't get it. When we go to a family meal and the one person, it's usually A mom will be like, Ben, will you pray? And everyone else goes, oh, great. They don't get it. Why in the world are we praying before we eat? When God does something in you, when God does something through you, people around you aren't always going to get it. They're not always going to get it. And that can be a distraction. But we need to endure through that distraction. Not only that, Nehemiah was tempted with relief from this situation. He was tempted by relief. You see, these guys that we just read about, they were like, you know what, Nehemiah? Let's go have a conference. Let's go have a conference in this city called Ono. There's a nice little resort over there where we can get on lounge chairs. They'll bring you the drinks with the little umbrellas. It'll be great. We can relax. You can put your hammer down. You can put the sword down. Come over here. Let's go have a conference. Let's talk about this. He was being distracted. They were trying to distract him with relaxation, with getting out of the work. But he wouldn't let that happen. He said, no way. I got a job to do, and I'm going to get it done. Then they tried nagging him. They sent him the same exact letter 5 times. Now, that had to be penned. They can't copy and paste like you do with a text when you can't get a hold of that spouse. Like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? They had to actually pen this, right? They were nagging him. Have you ever tried to get a project done with a little kid around? There's going to be nagging done. I'm trying to get something done, and I'm already frustrated because I don't know what I'm doing. And it's dad, 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 dad. You're like, no, dad, dad, dad. And I want them there so they can learn from my mistakes when I break it, you know. Dad, 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 nagging. Like, I can't take this. They even tried nagging him, sending him the same letter 5 times. Come on. They started up rumors. They're planning a rebellion. This wicked city, they're planning a rebellion again. They even went as far as to hire a false prophet. Are you sure that's what you're supposed to be doing? Are you sure that's what God wants? They tried getting in his ear with a false prophet. But this is what I love. How does Nehemiah respond to all this negativity? How does he respond to all these distractions? By saying this. Look at chapter 6, verse 9. Chapter 6, verse 9, right at the end, he says this. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. I don't care what comes at me. Give me strength. I love Nehemiah for that. This is the kind of guy that's going to get his hands dirty. He is going to be in it. He's working on the wall. You see, I've been in the church world a very long time. And there's a certain type of person, that drives me nuts. And I want to share with you this morning who that is. All right, this is a safe place. We can be honest, so I'm about to be honest. There are people that think they have this spiritual gifting of suggestions. Did you know that over there isn't quite working right? Did you know the parking lot, we don't have stripes on it anymore? Did you know that light bulb's out? Hey, the toilet paper's out. There are people in the church that just sit back on their comfy chair and point out every little thing that's wrong. Every little thing that's wrong. That's not Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the kind of guy who he's got his hands dirty. He is in it. God, strengthen my hands. He's a cup bearer. And he's rebuilding a wall in a city. He probably doesn't know what he's doing. But, oh God, strengthen my hands. God is going to call you to do stuff outside of your comfort zone. He's going to. He's going to call you to get your hands dirty. If you think your Christian walk and what it means to be a Christian is to come here on a Sunday morning and get a motivational speech, you are wrong. Your God has a mission for you, and that is to change this island. That is to change your family. That is to change your community. He has called you to it. And if he calls you to it, he's going to see you through it. Oh God, strengthen my hands. Wherever God has you, that's your mission field. When I was in school, when I was in high school, I used to pray like, oh God, make this time go by fast so I can get out of here and go in the ministry and tell people about Jesus. Do you know I haven't been around that many unsaved people since high school. That was my mission field. And I was too busy praying to get out of it to go into the ministry, to do what I'm doing now. But man, I wish I could go back. God has called you wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, wherever you live, wherever you grocery shop, wherever you pump your gas. He has a mission for you. You are a missionary wherever your foot is. You are a missionary. Oh God, strengthen my hands. Listen, when God gets involved, when we endure the distractions, God does the miracle. And you might say, well, what's the miracle? What's the miracle here? That Nehemiah was working on a wall? Nehemiah 6, verses 15 and 16 says this. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. For they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. You asked what the miracle was? This is the miracle. Those walls were down for 114 years. 114 years those walls were down. They were destroyed. For 72 years, people would try to start working on it. They weren't getting anywhere. For 72 years, Nehemiah gets involved. He bathes this thing in prayer. He says, God, I'm willing to do whatever you've called me to do. And in 52 days, the wall around Jerusalem was rebuilt. I had no concept of how much was taken care of, how much was done. But when you start counting, go through Nehemiah, start counting everything that they had to do. There was 42 particular sections of the wall and gates that are mentioned that were fixed. That's a miracle. Not only that, he got a group of men together, all working on a project at the same time, and they actually listened to him, and they got something done. That's a miracle. God did the impossible because he was willing to move. God provided because he was willing to move. And when he endured the distractions, the miracle happened. If the band could come out. You know, you and I aren't much different than Nehemiah. If you're just existing through life, this is a reality check. God's got a plan for you. God's got a mission for you. If all of us in this room would respond the way that Nehemiah did, this island would be changed quickly. God's got a mission for you. We can choose to respond the way that Nehemiah did and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not the best speaker. I don't have all the answers. But God, if you say so, if we can get out of the place of looking at what we have and what we don't have and instead say, God, you have all of me. That's what he wants. He wants all of you. He's in charge of the miracle, not you. You're in charge of obeying. You're in charge of stepping out of that comfort zone and saying, God, do it. Do it in me. Do what only you can do. Do not merely exist. Do not merely come here on Sunday mornings to check off a box. That's an insult to what God has planned for you. God wants to change this world through you. Each and every person in this room. None of us are exempt. I don't read anywhere that it says God has a plan for pastors and elders and that's it. That's not true. God has great plans for you. It's to turn this world right side up for him. We've all been in places, we've all been in situations where we're looking at a situation saying, God, how? Probably the same way Nehemiah was when he was looking at that wall. God, how? But we can't let the distractions, we can't let what we need. We can't let our own comfort get in the way. We need to reach that place where we say, this is all I got. This is all I am. But what I am is yours. Who I am is yours. Every second of every day is yours. Not just my Sunday mornings. Not just the car ride home. Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Saturday night, Friday night, every decision, everything that I do, God, is yours. Use me like you used Nehemiah to do the impossible for your glory.